Hello and welcome back to another episode of Notion Bonsai, and today I'm going to be pruning my Itoigawa Juniper, and I'm going to be giving you some pruning and shaping ideas that you can apply to your Juniper bonsai in order to take them that little step further into becoming a really great tree. Alright, so welcome to the video. This is the tree we're working on today. This is an Itoigawa Juniper, and if you haven't seen me work on this specific tree before, I will leave a link to the playlist of this specific tree in the description of this video. And since we have worked on this tree, it started off looking pretty bare. I wired all of the branches downward. I repotted it into this pond basket in order to get the roots really healthy, and as a result, the foliage really healthy. And as you can see, this tree has put on so much growth since we last worked on it, and it's beginning to look sort of like a dome shape, which is quite common for juniper bonsai, and it's that sort of classic Japanese bonsai look of a juniper. But as this tree is right now, it's starting to look like a blob where you can't really see the branches, and there isn't really any separation between the pads anymore. So throughout this video today, what I'm going to be doing is pruning the branches in order to create a distinction between the pads of the tree, but also to open up the tree so as it comes into the growing season, light is able to reach the inner branches and we can get lots of healthy back budding and keep the tree nice and small. And now before we begin, the tools that I will be using in this video today are some twig cutters, concave branch cutters, wire cutters, and some gin pliers. If you're new to bonsai and you don't have all of these specialized tools, by no means do you need them all. When I got started, I just got by with a cheap pair of scissors and some garden secateurs. The specialized tools do help a lot when it comes to doing certain cuts, but they aren't 100% necessary. Just whatever tool you have at your disposal to get the job done. You just want to make sure that whatever tools that you do use, for example, if they're scissors, you want them to be clean and sharp. Clean because we don't want to introduce any fungal or bacterial infections to our trees, and sharp because a sharp cut will give you a much cleaner cut, and clean cuts heal so much faster and more efficiently than a blunt cut on a tree that was squashed by a dull blade. So I'm just going to start by just taking out these little fertilizer baskets as I work on the tree, and we want to start thinning out the foliage and looking at any potential problem branches. And when I say problem branches, usually in bonsai, in the majority of trees, these are branches like this one here that's growing straight up, and just like this one growing straight up, coming from this weird spot here. Branches growing straight down can also be a problem because as they hang underneath a pad that we want to create, they will get shaded out, so they will probably die off anyway. So if you see any hanging down branches, it's good to remove them also. This one here for me, when I first had this branch, I think I remember keeping this as a safety precaution in case the end of this branch didn't make it, because I think it was quite weak at the time. But now that all of this has really flushed out and it's really green and healthy, now I think it's safe to remove this little branch. So as you see here, if we follow this branch out from the trunk, it comes along nicely. And then if this branch weren't here, we would have a lovely little pad at the end of the branch. And this one here, I really just don't think it's working. If we also allow this branch to grow on this area of the branch, we will get what's known as inverse taper. And this is a swelling in the area of the branch here, because it would flow nicely from thick, and then suddenly you get this bulge, and then it would flow out to the pad. So for that reason, I'm going to remove this branch. Alternatively, you could come in and just chop off all this section and allow this branch to become the new leader of that branch. But for me, that is just way too much taper. So I'm first just going to cut this off like this. And then on this area of the branch, I'm going to come in with the concave branch cutters and just clean up this cut. That way the cut is now nice and flush with the branch. And now on the end of this pad, we're going to do what's known as foliage thinning. And this is essentially taking the foliage that's on the tree and making it look a little bit more sparse, making it look thinner so it looks a little bit more delicate on the tree. And whenever you first come to pruning junipers, people may think they can prune it somewhat like a hedge and they cut right through everything like this. That is definitely not something you want to do, because if you cut through these nice tips of the juniper, the area that I just cut through here is going to turn brown, and it doesn't really look that nice. If you are going to prune the ends, you can pinch them, where you grab it and pull, but you would want to pull right in to the wood like that. So when I am thinning this to make this branch a little shorter, I'm actually coming into the woody part of the stem and cutting it like that. So I've removed all of that. And by removing the end of this branch like this, which is also known as like the leader of the branch, this will encourage all of these little side shoots to grow more, and as a result, the pad will get more dense. Even here, as you can see with this one, it's not that long, but we can simply just take the end off it like this, and we have just thinned it. Some of them back here are just so short and so young that I don't feel like I need to do anything to it. I just want to let this part grow. But any areas where it's starting to look a little bit too thick like that, I'm just going to shorten in. Here, as you can see, it's nice and flat. Up here, there's some branches going straight up like that one. We can get that out. You want this pad to be nice and flat. Coming over to this other side of the tree, as you can see, this is sort of growing in a straight up fashion. We can just clip this right in at the wood like this. That will flatten out the pad for us. Again, here, I'm just following the branch out from the trunk. All of this looks good. All of this looks good. When I come to the end of this branch, I could just take the tip off of this so it doesn't get any longer. That way I'm pushing the growth back in the tree and we're keeping it nice and compact. As I go along and I'm analyzing this tree, I'm taking branches that's coming from the trunk and I'm thinking, is that a pad on its own? Perhaps that could be wired down, maybe forward. Just thinking of different design options for this tree in the future. When I look at this, it doesn't look too bad. The growth is just a little on the end, and I would like to get more on that, so I'm just gonna let that grow. I don't want this growth to be taken into here, but if I did, I would take off the ends here and shorten that branch to just a little bit of foliage. And combined with removing more foliage on top and letting light in to hit this branch, then we would get lots of back budding along here. And that's how you push the foliage in. But with this one, I like the distance from the trunk, so I'm going to keep it at that. What could that be used for? I'm just sort of pulling everything down to see what's going on with the tree. If that's pulled down there, you could even use two branches together to become one pad. See how on this side I could use this branch combined with that one to give me a wider pad. You don't always have to have one branch per pad. Oftentimes we clump branches together to give us a more fuller looking tree, but I do need to keep thinning this tree because light really isn't reaching inside because the top is so dense. At the apex here, if I pull this branch down, you can see it does have a nice flat pad along here, but then there's this branch sticking straight up, and for me that is just too much of a back bud. It's too close to the trunk, so we'll get rid of that. Even here we can remove some of these just to make that pad a little bit more pronounced. And even now when you look from the top, that has made a lovely space for light to get into. So just rotating the tree around here again, there's another branch we can get rid of. There's some upward growing branches in there. This one here, there's some downward growing branches. So as you can see, this one is on the underside. Let's just cut that off. So that will be a nice little pad there. And now we're just creating that separation between all of these pads. So if I just go here, yeah, there's some branches we don't need in there. And pruning junipers really isn't that complicated. It's mostly removing branches growing straight up, ones growing straight down, and then just coming in and thinning them out like this. And then after procedures like this, time really does most of the work where the tree grows. And I find whenever you are growing junipers like this, the best place to keep them is in full sun. They do quite fine and actually thrive in direct sunlight. There is one thing worth mentioning though, and that is you can go overboard on pruning a branch. So for example, on this branch here, or any of the branches of the tree, if you were to take off all the foliage from that branch and think, oh, I'll start from scratch like I would, for example, a ficus or maple where you defoliate. If you do that to a juniper, 9 times out of 10, that branch is going to die. Junipers don't really like to be defoliated. So when pruning, always leave some green on the branch. So let's look at this branch here. As you can see, there isn't really much to do on the top. We've removed all the top ones, but there is some dangling growth down here. As you can see, these branches are coming downward and I don't really want that. Again, I'm encouraging flat pads, so I'm just going to cut off these ones hanging downward. And when it comes to pruning junipers, especially Itoigawa, you don't want to remove any more than 1/3 of the foliage at any one time. Because if you look at this foliage here, it's got this beautiful cord-like growth habit to it. But then if I swing the tree around and you look at somewhere like down here, the foliage is actually different. And this is what's known as the juvenile foliage. and it's quite spiky. To stop the tree reverting back to this juvenile foliage, we don't prune any more than 1/3. You can prune juniper right through from early spring to late autumn. I wouldn't prune these during the winter as the tree is dormant. But just personally, I prefer to prune juniper in spring, early summer, and after something drastic is done on the tree. The tree can spend the whole growing season then getting healthy again. And even sometimes if we prune early enough in the year, you can get a second flush of growth to then prune in late autumn. So you can actually prune juniper twice a year if the tree's healthy enough. When looking at this tree, I'm sort of trying to follow it with my eyes from the trunk line, from the base, the whole way up here. When we hit this branch could be a potential problem in the future when it comes to the design of the tree, because where this branch is positioned isn't in the absolute most ideal spot that we'd like. And if it swells here, we'll get inverse taper kind of on the inside of a bend, which is really not desirable. Normally, the branch that's back here on the outside of the bend of the trunk, it would be the more desirable one. So I'm considering maybe, do I remove this whole branch, wire this one down, or just allow that one to grow in this one's place? Then when I continue traveling up the tree, all this seems fine, and then we hit this branch. This one, maybe could the tree do without that branch, I'm thinking. So get rid of this branch and then maybe bring the apex up like this. These are just the kind of thoughts that's going through my mind as I'm thinking about branches and pads on the tree, because without this, there isn't really a pad in that spot. And this branch does so much for that part of the tree. So by removing this, it would really set the tree back quite a few years in that area. It would look kind of bare. Can't really bring anything down into that space without over bending the branch into a weird position to fill that space. So I think for today, I'm going to keep this branch just to keep the tree looking well. But in the future, as that one behind it develops and grows thicker, I will work on making this into a pad, and then perhaps eventually someday this one can go. But this branch here on the top, I think this is potentially a problem branch, because if we follow the tree up, as you can see, it tapers nicely into this lovely apex, and this branch almost makes the trunk look like a Y at the top, where if this is allowed to grow a little bit more, it may be confusing for the viewer of the tree as to which one is the leader. And whenever we have branches like this in bonsai, this is what's known as a competing trunk line. It's going to make the tree look a little bad right now, but in bonsai you really have to be prepared to cut in order to make great trees. So let's cut that off. That opens it up quite a lot in a really good way. Let me cut this nice and flush. I don't want to go too far, so I'm going to go a little bit, and we can go a little bit more. And now, as you can see, this tree is looking a lot more opened up around this front area, but I'm still not done with the tree. There are still a few minor problems that I would like to correct now. And by correcting problems like this, later on as time goes by, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years time, the problems from this tree will not be accentuated as it grows. You can get them right now when it's young. So later, whenever the tree puts all of its energy into all the foliage that we do keep, it develops in a much more streamlined way. Let's look at this part of the tree here. If I look right in at where it meets the trunk, right in at this area, there is 2 branches coming and emerging from the one spot from the trunk. Usually this, when both branches grow from a spot like this, creates a massive amount of inverse taper through time. So I'm going to remove one of these branches so that this area of the trunk doesn't begin to get too thick. And now the question is, which one of these branches do I remove? Do I remove the strongest one and allow this weaker one to catch up? Or do we remove this little weaker one and have this one set in place? I think developmentally speaking, this one is better to keep. This one here is just a little bit weaker, coming from a weird spot. The angle isn't quite right. And there's a lot more interest and movement on this one. So for them reasons, I'm going to remove this smaller one. Alright, and this will make an excellent cutting for a new bonsai. So the parts of this tree that I cut off today definitely will not go to waste. Another problem aesthetically with this tree is right here. We've got what's known as handlebar branches. And this is when branches are directly opposite each other on each side of the trunk. Looks like sort of handlebars of a bike or a motorcycle or whatever. But generally with the branch structure in a bonsai, it does look more pleasing when the branches are staggered. Like there's one here, one here, then one here, and then if this one wasn't here, it would go to another one. So now the question is, which one of these branches do I remove? Or could we remove both of these branches and have something up here fill the space? That's another possibility. There's never really one option in bonsai. There's many different things that you could do in different scenarios. I think here you could be perfectly fine to remove this one or this one. I think it's more down to my personal choice here of what I think would look good. When it comes to this branch below it, even then that branch below looks really strange because of the way it emerges from the trunk coming that way instead of out like this one. So now I'm thinking maybe I remove this, keep this but bring it down and remove this branch across here. You see, it's also important to think that not every single tree is going to be absolutely perfect. You'll never get a branch in the exact spot that you want. Perhaps it being slightly off and imperfect adds to the beauty of the tree. But one thing is for certain, there's too much going on in this area. Let me see. I like this one because that's coming on the outside of the bend. That's really nice. This one's a little strange. That one's not bad. That one's not bad either. Back here we've got this really full pad that's going to fill that area nicely. So I think I've made my decision. This branch doesn't work. I don't think it does. So we have solved the handlebar problem. That fills this space nicely. Whenever this one grows, it will grow up into that space. This back branch is filling out that space also. And this one here gives it balance on that side. And then whenever I wire this trunk, the top of it a little bit that way, this will look more full. So now that we have dealt with the problem branches of this tree, all I'm going to do now is just simply come in, thin it out, that way light can reach the interior branches, and as the growing season continues, the tree will thrive. Okay, I still don't feel that the branch, let me show you, right here, this branch, I still don't feel like this is a good branch for the tree. I would much rather this came down and filled the space. The angle of it is just really weird and it really doesn't go with the flow of the tree at all. So before I contemplate this anymore, let's take that off. I don't really want to make a gin or a deadwood feature out of it. Yeah, I am so much more happy with that. That's going to fill the space nicely. So this is all the foliage that we have removed from this little juniper. It's a little more than 1/3 of the foliage. A lot more than I would have liked to have removed today. But this tree did have quite a lot of problems. A lot of problem branches that really needed to be sorted out at this early stage. It may actually revert back to some juvenile growth as the year goes on, but I don't mind that as long as the tree has been properly dealt with now. Then later, whenever we take it into the real refinement stages, it'll go back to that nice cord-like foliage. But as you can see, if we come in the top here, lots of light can reach in here. Even if we come around here, light will reach in these branches. It doesn't look like it can here, but now we're going to wire the tree. I'm going to bring these down. That way light can reach in here. Because this is somewhat of a second styling to this tree, I'm not going to wire every single branch because some of these branches are in positions that I quite like. Maybe I would wire the secondary branches from this main branch. That way, instead of having to position this, because I like the position this is in, I don't need to position it. Maybe I can only wire the end branches just to give it a little bit of a twist to make that pad a little bit more flat. And then these thinner branches up here, they need wired just to bring them down a little. This one will be brought down into the space of the one we removed. So I'm going to wire that branch. Perhaps I could wire these two branches together. So I'm going to take some 2.5mm aluminium bonsai wire. It's really helpful to first just measure it along the branch, a little bit up here, and then leave an extra bit for around the trunk. And of course, if you're new to bonsai, we wire using a thing called the 2-branch principle. And this is when we wire one branch to another. That way each branch has an anchor and each branch's wire holds the other in place. So as you can see, I've just anchored it around here. I'm going to come up and around the trunk and then up and around this branch. And you want each coil to be roughly maybe 45 degrees. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but the cleaner you can get it, the better. And now that these two branches have been wired in place, it should be pretty easily manipulated down just to fill that gap. Now I'm going to wire this pad and make it a little bit more flat. Just so you can see this pad a little bit easier, I've got this piece of green plastic that just makes it stand out a little bit. So I would like to wire it along this branch and then out this branch. I'm just going to measure like this. This wire is actually a little bit too heavy. Let me just switch down to 1.5mm wire. So I am just first going around this little branch, being pretty careful not to damage anything. Be really careful with the delicate foliage as you come up to the end of the branch. Let's just anchor this now around this branch. So I'm going to go back and up. You don't want to trap anything under the wire when you're wiring junipers, because any foliage that you do trap under the wire will die. When you get to the edge of a little tuft of foliage like this, instead of cutting the wire, what I like to do is just swing it underneath and sort of hook it up. That way, instead of wrapping around the foliage, it sort of holds it like a little hanger. I'm just taking it, pulling it upward, and it will just hold that nicely. And we also have more control over the very end of the branch. And in that same fashion, I'm going to wire all the other branches in the trees. And of course, if it doesn't need wired, I'm not going to wire it. And as I treat this tree, I'm also keeping in mind that overall triangular shape. So that's as much wire as I'd like to put onto this tree. Now I'm going to do a little bit of shaping with the branches, not too drastically because we did give this tree a styling before. So let's just shape this pad nice and flat like we wanted. These branches here can be flattened a little bit more. You can actually bring that up at the end so it's nice and flat there. So we're getting the layers and bending this top part up. And as you can see with this little shoot, I'm keeping this as the leader of the tree. If I cut this, then the tree will send out more side branches from that part to try and gain apical dominance on the top. But if you leave this one, this little shoot, the only shoot on the tree that I kept, this will just continue to elongate and the leader of the tree will get taller. There's still so many more problems with this tree, but because you can only do so much things on a juniper at any one time, to try and solve everything at once would probably stress the tree too much and could kill it. So for that reason, that's all I'm going to do with this tree for now and today in this video. I will remove the wire on this tree just as it begins to bite into the tissue of the tree. You don't want it to scar, so just as you see it biting in, take the wire off. If you see it biting in on one area but not another area, only take it off where it's biting in, because you do want it to bite in just a little bit in order to hold the branch in place. Now it's time just to put these little fertilizer baskets back into the soil. These are organic bonsai fertilizers. And I believe the NPK value is 10.66, so it's extremely high nitrogen. And with that high nitrogen, we'll get lots of healthy growth. And we should get lots more shoots like this on the tree all over it. As the tree grows, I don't want to keep coming back and pruning. It may be tempting when you're first getting started in bonsai to keep clipping it, to keep it in shape always. But with the majority of trees, you want to let it grow out, let it get really healthy and bushy, then come back next year, prune it in, let it grow, prune it in. I think maybe I'll do another extra one prune and work on this tree one more time later in the year, depending on how it goes. If it's not super healthy, maybe I'll do it next year. But all that's left to do now is give this tree a water. And there you guys have it. On that, I'm going to end off this video right here. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like on this video. It really helps out the channel a lot with the YouTube algorithm. And please let me know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. Perhaps there is something different you would have done with this tree. Maybe you would have even left it to grow another year before working on it. I'm always open to new and different ideas in bonsai. If you would like to support me and the things that I do on this channel, hit the thanks button down below. If you would like to become a channel member, hit the join button. That way you can get early access to new videos before they go out to everyone else. And you get access to membership posts. If you'd like to keep up to date with all the things that I do off camera, please follow me on Instagram. It's @NotionBonsai, and you'll be able to see all the things that I do on there. But on that, thank you so very much for watching.